On this edition of the Newsmakers, the battle for Aleppo. How will the fate of Syria's second city determine the fate of the country as a whole? Also on today's program, Russia pulls out of a long-standing nuclear agreement with the United States. What does this reveal about the state of relations between Moscow and Washington? And in Picture This, people across Thailand offer prayers for their king after the palace says his health is unstable. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Now, eastern Aleppo is the rebel-held part of Syria's second city. More than 250,000 people are living under siege and under sustained attack from regime and Russian warplanes. France has called on the ICC to investigate possible war crimes being carried out. And the UN Special Envoy to Syria says that unless the bombing stops, eastern Aleppo could be completely destroyed by the end of the year. But warnings that the world must work to prevent a massacre have been met again with diplomatic paralysis. On Saturday, Russia used its veto in the UN Security Council to block a resolution that would halt the airstrikes, and the bombings have continued, with activists reporting another 20 deaths on Tuesday. Our newsmaker today is Aleppo, as we ask, what can be done to stop the bloodshed?
The bottom line is, in maximum 2 months, 2.5 months, the city of eastern Aleppo, at this rate, may be totally destroyed.
It's been nearly 3 weeks since the Syrian government began its offensive to retake eastern Aleppo. A bombardment of airstrikes by the regime and Russia, but both deny targeting hospitals. The Syrian regime has been gaining ground in the rebel-held areas and says it plans to fight on until its mission is accomplished.
Continue the fight with the rebels till they leave Aleppo. They have to. There's no other options. We won't accept that terrorists will take control of any part of Syria, not only Aleppo.
Eastern Aleppo is one of the major urban strongholds of the Syrian opposition. And some analysts say whoever wins the battle for Aleppo will win Syria's war. While the battle rages in the east, the Syrian regime is keen to show that in the areas it controls, life goes on. Syrian Arab news agency recently released this video, appearing to show Syrians enjoying the nightlife in Aleppo. But for nearly 250,000 people trapped in the besieged rebel side of the city, it's a different story. The regime has said it will guarantee safety for residents and rebel fighters who choose to leave. But many say they fear arrest. And there are reports the regime is blocking routes used for supplies and to escape the city. It's a siege designed to starve opponents into submission and force their surrender.
Thanks to your actions today, Syrians will continue to lose their lives in Aleppo and beyond.
One of us, perversely the President of the United Nations Security Council, is intent on allowing the killing to continue.
The battle for Aleppo is also playing out at the round table of the United Nations. On Saturday, the UN Security Council voted on a draft resolution calling for Russia and Syria to halt airstrikes in Aleppo. Russia used its veto to oppose it, and also tabled its own resolution focusing on restoring the ceasefire agreed in September. That was also voted down.
Given that the crisis in Syria is at a critical stage, when it is particularly important that there be a coordination of the political effort, this waste of time is inadmissible.
With a complex web of alliances and a stark warning that time may be running out, what can be done now to save Aleppo? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me here in the studio is Ahmed Al-Burai. He is a lecturer at Istanbul Aydin University. And from Dubai, I'm joined by Monser Akbik. He is a member of the Syrian Opposition Coalition. Thanks both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me start with a rather broad question, I think. All the efforts being made, constant negotiations, drafted resolutions at the United Nations, yet Syria has continued its decline. Was an opportunity missed here to reach a political resolution at some point, or is this a quagmire at its worst? Let me start in the studio, Ahmed.
I think we all know it is no secret that Syria has been trapped on a crumbling cliff. And it is already a failed state. And the whole powers in the region, whether international or regional powers, they are not serious, they're not genuine in their claim that they want to find a way out, they want to find a solution to this ongoing violence. And I think this is the mess of this opportunity is normal, because again, the actors on the ground are not interested from one hand. From the other hand, the people, they lost the confidence as well as the trust that there might be any kind of solution to the conflict in Syria as far as Assad is still in power, which is a big problem for the Syrian people.
Monser, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we have seen what happened in the Security Council. There is a huge tension between the Western group and Russia. And Russia vetoed the resolution which was proposed by France and Spain. And in short, the resolution was calling for the halt of bombing from the skies, cessation of hostilities, and allowing humanitarian aid to enter Aleppo. Now, since this Russia did not agree on that resolution, did not pass, this means that the bombing will continue and the aid will not enter Aleppo. This means that there are 275,000 civilians there. They don't have food, they don't have medicine, and also they have short of water. So the humanitarian catastrophe is going to continue in Aleppo and to a higher scale. And we are not seeing now any light at the end of the tunnel on the short term, how we can convince the Russians to just stop the bombing and try to find some way out of this, this political bottleneck.
Now, both of you believe that Assad must go. Syria cannot move forward. It can't rebuild if Assad is still part of the political landscape in Syria. But he has support. He has some support from within Syria, and even more importantly, he has support from very powerful allies in Russia and Iran as well. Having said that, can he be completely dropped from the equation, as I know you both wish he were, but just because that's what you want doesn't mean that's necessarily how it's going to play out. Ahmed, is there a way to go forward if he refuses to leave?
You know, already the revolution in Syria started because of this man. He and his family are the crux of the problem itself. That's why it is cynical, it is rather ridiculous and absurd to have any kind of political solution if Assad stays in power. The people are fed up with the density of the Assad family who've been controlling Syria for more than 4 decades. So he should go. Yes, of course there is a support from, unequivocal support from Russia as well as Iran. They believe that he is the guardian of their interests in Syria, and they have been supporting him, but they should know that they're betting on the losing horse.
But as you say that, you say they're betting on a losing horse, but from their perspective, they're winning.
Yeah, they could think so, but again, the formula is different. People at the end, people and right will win. And these people didn't sacrifice all these amount of blood of their beloved relatives, families, their houses. They left the places for nothing. It doesn't make any sense, again, to tell them that let's go, let's have a U-return and let's go back as if nothing happened. There are lots of massacres, lots of genocide happened. The international community is on the stake. The credibility of the so-called international community is on the stake, and the people need to say, otherwise the whole region would never trust the so-called international community, and things may get worse and worse.
Okay. Monser, people, particularly in the West, do sympathize with your cause. The concern, though, is that Egyptians basically had the same dream when they went out into Tahrir Square that your party does as well. Do you think Syria, though, can achieve what Egypt was not able to?
Yes, but it will take time. Now, the people, when they took to the streets in 2011 in Syria, me being Syrian, I know how difficult and how near to impossible it was for people to do that. It needed a lot of courage because Assad has these intelligent forces and people, they really cannot even tell a joke or even write something on a social media against the government. Immediately, the secret police, they will take them and they will torture them. Many times they torture them to death. So this is a very tyrannical regime that is, people are living in fear. So they took to the streets, and Assad used live ammunition. He shot at the protesters, and many died. And next day also they came out and they continued for many months until it turned into, as you can see, armed struggle. So so many sacrifices has been made, but the Syrian people has proven and has shown that there is no way back. So this tyranny has to end. Even if this revolution is going to continue many years to come, the tyranny will end. The Assad cannot really have a military victory in this war. This war will continue many years if he still thinks that. So unless he changes his calculations and agree to a political process that will lead to a political change, a real political change in Syria, then he will be just dreaming of a military victory that they will never have.
And ideally, Monser, you are asking for a multi-party democracy in Syria, but I'm asking you, composed of which groups, which parties? There are so many rebel factions now fighting with competing interests. How do you envision an actual functional democracy now?
Well, there is a process. Basically, there is a Geneva communique which has been agreed between all the countries, including the P5, including Russia and the United States. Now, the roadmap for political transition in Syria is basically what has been agreed between the Syrians themselves, whether the opposition or the regime, and all the countries who are concerned, that there is a roadmap into a transitional government. Now, the transitional governing body is going to have these duties in order to solve the problem of the military factions, solve the problem of gathering the arms, solve the all these issues that is, the chaos that happened in the country. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. I'm not saying that it's going to happen within 1 or 2 days or 2 weeks, but this is something that the transitional government need to deal with. Maybe it will take a couple of years in order to gather all these arms and to gather all these factions and go into a central government again.
Okay, Ahmed, do you have the same outlook? Can these various factions and parties be brought together?
This is the pretext of the Americans as well as the Russians. They believe that if Assad, let's take the scenario, Assad has gone, and now the day after. That's the problem of the Obama administration in Libya after the regime was toppled. So there is a political void. Who's going to fill that void? It's the problem here, and the ball is in the court of the opposition. I believe that the moderate opposition, what we call the moderate opposition, and the American like to label the opposition partisan factions with moderate and extremist, and as if they're one sorry, as if they're in one pot. So the opposition with the wide spectrum are not able to present the international community with a genuine alternative to Assad. But again, I go back to the Egyptian model, because this is the Arab Spring as a whole. In order to understand the whole picture, you need to take it all. The Americans and the Russians in Syria, from the one hand, they claim that if Assad go, what will happen? Now, what happened in Egypt? It was a very fruitful, a democratic process. But who toppled that democratic process? It's the West, by supporting Sisi, the one who committed the coup against the Egyptian president, the first democratically elected president. The people of this region can have democracy, they can practice real freedom of speech, they can express their own opinion, but the West need to understand that the people in this region do have the right to do these things. They can make mistakes, they're not professional as the West, they're still amateurs, but they should have at least a chance to practice this. Otherwise, we will stay in this vicious circle, ongoing violence, and they will say, who's going to replace him? It is, and again, it is cynical that a population of more than 23 million people, Syrian, that they cannot have someone who can replace the so-called Assad.
Okay, Ahmed Al-Burai, I'm going to let you have the last word. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd like to thank both our guests, Monser Akbik as well, for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, the United States and Russia are completely at odds over Syria, as we've just been hearing. Is the breakdown now of a landmark nuclear agreement another sign of deteriorating relations? And picture this, Thailand's king is the world's longest reigning monarch, but at 88 years old, his health is failing. We look at how the Thai people are reacting. From Syria and Crimea to allegations that Russia is interfering in the U.S. election, relations between Moscow and Washington are hitting a low that hasn't been seen in decades. So against this backdrop, what should be made of Russia's decision to withdraw from a landmark nuclear cooperation deal? Is it simply a reflection of the current state of affairs or a sign of worse to come, even a return to the Cold War? Randolph Nogel reports.
The United States and Russia will each irreversibly and transparently dispose of no less than 34 metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium. Together, that is enough material for nearly 17,000 nuclear weapons.
It's certainly a step in the direction of our shared goal of nuclear disarmament.
The US and Russia were on much better terms 6 years ago, when the two countries updated a landmark nuclear security agreement. It was put in place to destroy military stockpiles of plutonium and was one of the seminal disarmament deals of the early post-Cold War era. Intended as one more step away from a nuclear doomsday, the agreement was also aimed at preventing nuclear materials from falling into the hands of terrorists or rogue states. Now, Russia has withdrawn from it. Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a statement saying Moscow pulled out as a result of unfriendly actions by the US.
This is the latest in a series of steps by Russia to end long-standing cooperation on nuclear security and disarmament, including its decision to not participate in the 2016 Nuclear Security Summit and its unwillingness to continue strategic arms control reductions.
The move has raised fears that nuclear cooperation between the US and Russia is under threat. The two countries overwhelmingly possess the lion's share of the world's nuclear warheads. But just as alarming is a tableau of troubles that have cropped up between the two former foes.
At sea, in the air, in space, and in cyberspace, Russian actors have engaged in challenging international norms. And most disturbing, Moscow's nuclear saber rattling raises troubling questions about Russia's leaders' commitments to strategic stability.
Strategic stability, or balance of power politics, has been a staple in the post-Cold War US-Russia relationship. One of the main reasons Moscow made the move is over NATO's buildup of forces in countries near Russia's borders. 3,000 to 4,000 troops have been moved to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to deter possible Russian encroachment onto their territory following Russia's seizure of Crimea. Now Moscow has moved missiles capable of carrying nuclear weapons into Kaliningrad, a Russian coastal enclave, which would put Berlin within range of a strike. Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier has warned tensions between Russia and the West are more dangerous than during the Cold War. The diplomatic fallout is being driven by the US-Russia divide on Syria, along with accusations of cyber war against Moscow and perceptions of tampering in the US elections. A battle for influence is again being waged, and a former superpower may be rising. With so many points of contention on the geopolitical map, the fraying of relations between two nuclear states appears to be accelerating. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, Richard Weitz joins me now from Washington, D.C. He is the director and senior fellow at the Center for Political and Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Richard, thanks so much for joining us. When Germany's foreign minister says tensions between Russia and the West are more dangerous than during the Cold War, should we be frightened?
I think that's an exaggeration. I, unfortunately, was a child of the Cold War, and I remember it was just the potential downsides were just much greater. For example, when we had conflicts between the Soviet Union and the United States over the Middle East, the Soviets would put their nuclear forces on alert. They would send out their ships. There was a real risk of, though low, there was still a real risk of a major world war breaking out every time there was an Israel-Arab conflict. Now, it's not. It's just a different magnitude. I mean, there are tensions. There's risk of the shooting down of each other's planes, or more likely just failing to cooperate in achieving joint positive outcomes, such as an end to the war in Syria. But I think it's just not as serious.
Still, though, breaking this nuclear deal, I mean, it does sound scary to the general public, because there's always a fear that nuclear material is now going to end up somehow in the wrong hands. Is that a valid concern? Where could all this excess material now ultimately end up?
Oh, yes. The most serious danger to international security, to our security, is if some of these terrorist groups, such as those fighting in Syria or Iraq, were to get their hands on a nuclear weapon or something, be able to make one, or be able to detonate a nuclear reactor in a power plant or something like that. That could cause thousands, perhaps millions of deaths. It would devastate the world economy. It would be a total disaster. And we've been working with Russia and other countries to try and strengthen that through the nuclear security covenants and some of these agreements to minimize the amount of nuclear material that's available. Now, Russia recently announced that it was suspending execution of 2 of these agreements. There's one to get rid of excess plutonium, and there's another one to cooperate with the United States on how to make more secure and safe nuclear reactors and some other scientific and technical cooperation. And I'm sure they chose that because it gets a lot of attention, because, as you said, it's nuclear. It's something that's very important to President Obama. But the immediate effects will be small, because neither of those agreements were really working. The plutonium disposition agreement was something the U.S. has still struggled to implement, and so Russia was just following the U.S. path, and they said they're still going to get rid of it anyway, just not in cooperation with the U.S., at least for now. And the other one was already suspended by the U.S. sanctions over Russian actions in Ukraine. So the immediate effects are small. I think the longer-term effects could be greater, though.
Okay, so when the National Academy of Sciences says that excess fissile material poses a clear and present danger, is that an exaggeration?
No, that is correct. I mean, I'm not worried about a nuclear war between Russia and the United States. I do worry a lot about nuclear accidents, and especially nuclear terrorism. And that's why until recently, that was an area that was of strong cooperation between Russia, the United States, and other countries. This actually cooperation started weakening earlier this year, as you recall, we had the final nuclear security summit in Washington, and the Russians chose to boycott it. But in each case, such as when they suspend agreements that aren't being fully implemented anyway, or when they skip the nuclear security summit here, they minimize the damage by, for example, they didn't try and get the Chinese or other countries not to attend. They sent an observer. So the impact in all these cases is more symbolic than real so far.
So far. Okay, Richard Weitz, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us, as always, on the Newsmakers. In today's Picture This, Thailand's royal palace has issued a statement saying the 88-year-old king is not stable following a medical procedure last weekend. Let's take a look at how people in Thailand are reacting to the news. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.